Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm so happy to see you all again, although it is still virtually. I'm the facilitator today. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Dave Chen, and I'm the convener of Enterprise Architecture Specialist Group, EASG, and the Director of Emerging Technology of Hong Kong Computer Society. Besides me, it is our honor to have another facilitator today, Mr. Aaron Tan, who is the President of Enterprise Architecture Chapter, Singapore Computer Society, and the Chairman of IASA Asia Pacific. He will help facilitate the Q&A session. Aaron, you may briefly introduce yourself and say hi to both friends from Singapore and Hong Kong.
Yeah, hi everyone. Good afternoon. And I know it's Friday, and we are still working. Most of us are working remotely. So yeah, welcome. Of course, this is our second collaboration this year with the Hong Kong Computer Society, and also with the on behalf of Singapore Computer Society. I would like to welcome everybody and hope we can have more collaboration moving forwards.
Thank you so much. And this webinar is co-organized by HKCS, Hong Kong Computer Society, and Singapore Computer Society. On behalf of HKCS and SCS, I'm delighted to welcome you all to this webinar. We are happy to receive over 300 registrations for this webinar today. Thank you so much for the continuous support. The topic today we are going to explore is about adaptive change design for digital transformation. Due to the pandemic, we all started to feel the impact of modern technology on our personal and business lives. And 24/7 connection was no longer an option. Long-term impacts across aspects like the political, economical, social, technological, environmental are all impacted. Most importantly, those changes that we cannot predict, and we all don't know when will be safe to go back to the normal life or need to stick to this new normal. So digital transformation is no longer an option and becomes a strategic plan for every organization. But however, such transformation introduces a lot of changes in both business and technological aspects. In this seminar, our speaker, Nigel Green, will share the adaptive change design action-focused toolset, which complements the digital transformation strategy that can overcome the transformation challenges. Before we start, may I invite our HKCS President, Dr. Ted Shun, to give us an opening speech. Dr. Ted, please.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Thanks to friends from Singapore and friends, the members of Hong Kong CS attending today's web seminar. So once again, I'd like to, on behalf of Hong Kong CS, to thanks Mr. Nigel Green. He's waking up in the early morning, I think.
Yes.
Do the sharing with us. And also thanks Aaron Tan as a facilitator of today's webinar as well. I think now we are coming to the new normal situation, okay, i.e. that we all having webinar during lunchtime or during late evening. And another new normal is while attending the webinar during lunchtime, we all having our lunch box putting aside next to our notebook, okay? So once people turn off their video, then they will try to have a bite on their lunch box, okay? So once again, I think this is a very good collaboration between Hong Kong CS and SCS, and I hope this kind of collaboration in running webinar or other activities will be continued in the near future or even after the COVID-19. Maybe there's another new normal collaboration model. So without further ado, I pass it back to Dave. Once again, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Let me introduce the speaker today, Nigel Green. Some of you may know him well because he's always so supportive in the past to our events. And he also provided some talks in the past few years when he was stationed in Hong Kong. He is now in UK, so as Kat mentioned, it's a very early morning. Nigel is a change designer, enterprise architect, author, and coach. And he specializes in navigating complex change journeys. Over his career, he has developed change strategies and business technology architectures for both established and startup organizations. He is recognized worldwide as a thought leader and author. Today, he advises companies worldwide on how to plan and execute large-scale digitally enabled change programs. And he lives in England, and so let's welcome. We appreciate for so early. Please welcome Nigel Green. For all the audience, you can feel free to leave your questions in the chat room. In the Q&A session, you can see the Q&A button in the Zoom. So let's pass the screen to Nigel. Nigel, please. Thank you.
Hi, thanks very much for that great introduction. Yes, it is a bit early in the morning, but I will try and be lively for you today. So thanks very much for the invite. And it's really great to talk to my friends in Asia. As you said, I lived in Hong Kong almost for 10 years on and off, and also spent a lot of time in Singapore. So it's great to talk to you all. So let's get on with this. I'm going to have to be careful of my timing, I think. So as was said in the intro, today more than ever we're facing unprecedented VUCA storms. VUCA, if you haven't heard of it before, is a term that was made popular after 9/11 by the US Army. And it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And as was mentioned, COVID-19, of course, is threatening our lives, our livelihoods and businesses alike. And I think it's fair to say we are looking at new normals, very much so now. So we need to become the masters of adaptive change. Getting ready for the transformation journey is really important. I like to think of it like a flight. We need to do some pre-flight checks, and we need to be able to really. Oh, excuse me, I've got a little bit of a technology problem here. Okay. We need to be able to look at various transformation types that we have to do. Oh, by the way, you'll see these little icons, the snake under the aeroplane there, and that's an icon for one of the change design, adaptive change design tools, and we'll come on to that a bit later, so it makes a bit more sense. So when we're looking at transformation types, we need to understand which flavor of digital transformation we're going for. And there's really about 5 different types of transformation in play. There's right from the beginning, number 1 there. That's the sort of marginal gains. I'm not going to read through all the text. You can get the slides later. But it's the accrual of marginal gains. These organizations are typically heavy on legacy IT systems. The next one's a transformation strategy, where there's a roadmap for digital transformation, but it's still very much in the early stage, really. And you go through these various steps right to the end there, which number 5, which is really behaving exactly like a digital native. And that's a full-blown business model change, full-blown disruptive new way of working. So as you go through those different transformation steps, these different transformation types, you can see them as steps, but in fact they're not linear. So it really depends on the business that you're in. So obviously, if you're a power company, you'll have one type of style of transformation. If you're a postal company, you'll have a different type, and so forth and so forth. So we need to understand both the IT aspects and the non-IT related impact of that transformation. So really, at this stage, you need to start thinking about how you would have this discussion with your business colleagues. So there's a technology aspect, but there's a big business aspect as well. So I talked about the digital natives just then, the born digital firms, and there'd be the Googles and the Facebooks and the Twitters and the rest. And then there's the traditional companies. Most of the companies I work with are very much those traditional companies. So is it possible for a horse, a traditional company, to become a unicorn, or is there something else that's in between? So one of the big things is that born digitals understand that IT is part of an integrated business. It's not a second-class citizen. IT is the business for those guys. Culture can be the biggest challenge. Now those born digital companies tend to have a very different style of culture, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So I'm going to talk about a few examples to try and bring this whole thing to life. So digital transformation, this first example is an energy provider, and they're looking to go to smart grid. So that's their style of transformation. And in this case, the COO recognizes the need to move to smart grid. It's not an option, it's absolutely important. And the first step is to deploy smart meters. And this requires sign-off from the regulator. And that's quite a slow political process. The transformation aspirations, however, are to provide a full range of smart grid services, including electric vehicles, sustainable energy, bidirectional grid, meet all the environmental targets, and expect marginal gains and innovation opportunities as they go forwards. Now, for them, that's a transformation strategy that's the number 2 style strategy. And the time objective is probably about 5 years. In fact, it's probably nearer 8 years. But that's because of as I say, the slow political process. So in this case, well, the horse isn't becoming a unicorn. He's becoming a faster horse, but that's their style of transformation. The next example I'll talk about is quite different. It's a digital transformation for a gambling company. And the situation there is that a new CIO had joined, and he was given 5 objectives. The first one of those was to rapidly deal with the post-merger integration. So this company had actually bought their second largest competitor. To reduce the IT running costs, to modernize the retail stores, to create an omni-channel experience for the customer, and to keep the regulator happy. Again, a very much regulated business. And their transformation aspirations were to become the number 1 online gambling company, and to basically pivot their business from a traditional high street betting shop presence to completely online. So in this case, they really are going towards that unicorn model. And that's the number 4 style strategy. Their time objective is about 2 years. So the first thing, well, we looked at different transformation types, and you really do have to spend quite a bit of time figuring out what your organization is actually going to transform to, and how you're going to do that. But just as importantly, you have to think about the different systems types in play. And when I talk about types, I have 2 different areas. The first area is what I call a systems categorization. And this is just a fairly general thing, but it gives you a good starting point for a conversation. And in this case, I'm using an aeroplane again, and I'm talking about, okay, there's resilient, there's robust, and there's agile systems. The robust system, for example, might be the undercarriage. The agile system, in this case, is the seating and entertainment system. In airplanes, they can be swapped out very easily, very quickly. And the resilience system, and this is often misunderstood, I think, and sometimes confused with agile, is a resilience system, and that's the wing. And resilience actually means flexible. In the same way that in Hong Kong, you have this bamboo scaffolding everywhere, and you do that because it's very flexible and bends in the wind. And if you have a typhoon, it's a better system. So that's the resilient system is that ability to flex and bounce back. So it can stand turbulence, it can withstand change. So that's the sort of simple model. And then there's a more advanced model, which some of you may have come across before. It's from a guy called Dave Snowden. He's a Welshman, and he's given his framework a very strange Welsh name, and it's actually pronounced Cynefin, and it's a sense-making framework. And if you look at this, you can see there are different categories of system that he describes here. By the way, his systems framework is not actually focused on technology. It comes from the worlds of knowledge management and psychology. Excuse me. So his systems here are, the first one down here is obvious, which you could say is simple. The next one is complicated, and that requires specialist knowledge, specialist expertise, algorithms, or something like this. Complex, which is another way of talking about complex, is complex adaptive, which is a system that deals with emergence, and so is very good at responding to things that change in the outside world. And then we've got chaotic systems, which, excuse me, which sounds a bit odd to talk about, but actually you do sometimes deliberately go into chaotic systems because you're trying to understand what they're doing. If you fall into chaotic systems, that's very dangerous. Excuse me. But some of you will have heard of bimodal IT has been talked about, and pace layering, which is another way of breaking out IT systems. But I think they're left wanting because it's a much more complex relationship between business and technology. Excuse me, I need to take a drink. So let's just look at how some of these might look. Here's a generic example. So typical company might have an email system, customer management, customer engagement system, and an ERP system. And broadly speaking, they fall into these sort of categories. Customer engagement is more agile. You might have a lot more mobile apps and interaction with the customer, and suits itself very well to agile style software development. Email is probably the most resilient system we know. It's been going for a very long time now and has been able to cope with lots of changes. You can do pretty much anything with email and it doesn't really break. And an ERP system is a more robust type system, and it has a relationship, as you can see there, with the complicated domain in Dave Snowden's model. And customer engagement comes over to the complex adaptive emergent solutions area, and email, because it's a kind of obvious system, it's a simple system actually now, falls over there. I should say that Dave's model is actually quite fluid. He makes the point that all of our systems, both IT and business systems, tend to move around that landscape. So something that's in the complicated landscape today might fall down into the obvious or simple landscape tomorrow. So I'll now look at maybe this is an energy provider. This is the actual company that I've worked with before. And you can see here that their SCADA systems are robust. And those are the systems that run the actual power grid and so forth. And they fall over. It's complicated. Smart meters over there. Customer engagement similarly down there. And billing, it's kind of a semi-obvious system these days, comes over there. The pace of change for the energy provider is relatively slow due to the importance of energy provision. It's important to maintain energy production, but at the same time we might be implementing isolated A/B type testing with our online systems or mobile apps. The gambling firm, again, you see the model again. I'm not going to go through all this. It's, I'll be running out of time otherwise. But what I would like to do is just talk about this one system here that was called the Data Fabric. And it's actually a bit of a pattern that we've used several times now. Originally with originally with a startup that I was involved in many years ago, then with the Royal Mail here in the UK, and then later on with this gambling company. So, big, hairy, scary picture. Data Fabric is fundamentally it's an integration and provisioning architecture. So what we mean by that is where you see this box that's got Data Fabric applications. Those actually were a new set of apps that we were building, and they were all being built as microservices. So it's a very modern way of building things. But we decided we wanted to put them onto, say, a fabric, so that we were doing all the data provisioning separate from the apps themselves. The integration piece is right to left and left to right, either way around, but they're essentially the legacy applications that are using this fabric as a way of sharing data between them. I'll come into the detail of the architecture a bit later. Now, one of the things that we found is really important to do right up front is make sure you've got some really solid design principles. So we're quite pernickety about those. We like to get them absolutely right. We like to think of them both in terms of rationale and implications. And that's something sometimes gets left off of principles. But we really need to understand those things. So some of the principles are things like design for loose coupling, avoid shared database integration, publish everything, amplify and attenuate. Well, that basically means is amplify the things that really work, or the what we're saying here is the apps that are most useful, and then if they're not, they just sort of wither on the vine, given that they're microservices. And it's an adaptive ecosystem. Asynchronous is the default. Excuse me. We leverage tried and tested design patterns, and we're very keen on this. And You see the icon there, the blue icon at the bottom. We'll have detail about that on Adaptive Change Design website. This particular set of patterns was developed by Gregor Hopp, who worked for Google. He's worked for a number of the big players. I'm not sure who he's with now. And it's got enterprise integration patterns. There are about 75, I think, patterns. And we used around 20 in our design of the data fabric. Very useful. And then a couple of other Uber patterns, if you like, that we used, reference architectures. There's a piece called Rapids, Rivers and Ponds by Fred George. You could look him up on YouTube. He's got a really great talk about this particular architecture. And this is describing a message bus, which, you know, he uses a Kafka queue. He then has a 0MQ queue across the green bit in the middle, the rivers, and then the ponds are the databases. So the idea is that you've got a very high capability to ingest event messages into your message bus, and then they get filtered down into more topics in the rivers, and then they're persisted in each microservices data store, which is referred to as ponds. And I'm not going to go into this because I don't fully understand it myself because I'm not an Amazon guy, but this is a deployment architecture actually implementing that. So it's great. I mean, that's not the architecture we use with the gambling company, but it shows that other people are using it. And then the last bit down here is something called CEDAR, which we used with the Royal Mail, which was, it stands for a staged event driven architecture. And what that is a sort of series of cascading queues. So you can do very high volumes of data, summarizing it out as you go through the cascade of information. And because we were trying to process 4 billion events a day, so that's quite a lot. Okay, adaptive planning. Okay, so traditional planning is a bit like this left-hand side picture with the Spitfire, and it's firing its guns. And they weren't really very good. They had to get very close to the target, and even if the target wasn't moving around too much, they quite often miss. With planning in the adaptive world, we need to think more like we're using guided missiles. In other words, they lock onto a target and they tend to be fairly accurate, and they're very good at dealing with targets that are moving all the time. So let's talk a little bit about enterprise architecture. Well, I suppose I'm going to be maybe a bit outspoken here. I have carried the title Enterprise Architect for many a year, as you know, Dave. But I don't know if that's going to last much longer. I think that the job title Enterprise Architect might well disappear. However, I don't think that it's never been more important to think about enterprise architecture. Okay, but I think we have to have some different perspectives. And so, as I say at the top, we need, you know, traditionally we're known for being the IQ guys, the smarty pants, but we've got to be a bit more socially aware the EQ, emotional intelligence as it stands for. We've got to think about things like storytelling skills. And in fact, we do include storytelling in the Adaptive Change Design Toolkit. In fact, my business partner is a storyteller. It's very interesting when you start to merge the two different worlds, because we're starting to find some interesting and novel ways to share information and be more engaging with the business. So in my little cartoon here, I've got a lady there who's a next practice enterprise architect, whatever that's going to be called. Maybe a change designer, I don't know. And my job is to make sure the whole team think about EA. I facilitate workshops and I'm on hand for advice when needed. So much more of an advisory role, much more of a facilitation role. You know, really, you can't be the guy or the girl sitting in an office, not engaged with the business and the technical teams. So, talk briefly about how am I doing for time, Dave?
Yeah.
Yeah,
10 to 15
10 minutes. Okay. So I talk a little bit about what adaptive change design is, why I've worked on it, how it's come about. Well, in some ways, it came about because of COVID. I was on lockdown for a long time. I started to write a book, which I think I mentioned to you before. The last time I presented to the Hong Kong Computer Society. I thought it was a good time to actually write my book, which was going to be called Found in Design. And I got to the point where I realized that a book is still too much of an old way of doing things. It's a push. It's not an interactive thing. It's not an engaging thing necessarily, unless you're a really good writer. I tried to make it engaging, but it got very silly. So I thought, you know what, maybe I'll create this as a website, but really as a basis to try and create a bit of a community. It's all under Creative Commons, and I've whizzed through some stuff today, of course, which was far too quick, really. But I've illustrated to you maybe 4 or 5 of the tools, and we have at the moment 19. So the aim is really to create this set of tools that we think, well, we know that they work because we've actually used them. One of the criteria for any tool we put up there is it's got to have been used at least twice in anger. And we haven't created all the tools ourselves. As you've seen, we use other people's design patterns and so forth, and give them full credit for that, of course. But it's more about how we put the things together and the sort of experiences that we have, and we can tell the stories to you about what we did and what went wrong and what went well and so forth. So that's really its aim. Very much a kind of open source kind of way of looking at things. This is why this is taken directly from the website, and you can now see why I've got aeroplanes everywhere, because we've tried to use this theme in the website to try and give people a feel for where things fit and how to navigate through. On the website, all the icons are clickable on the dashboard there, and they'll take you to the sorts of things that we've just been discussing. Some of them have got, they've all got summaries, and that's a good starting point, but we're trying to put more resources behind each of those to really flesh them out. And some of them have got a lot more information than others. So I've said there's 19 tools, and they're covering this 11 aspects of change. So strategy, planning, leadership, ideation, risk, governance, architecture, culture, communication, and business analysis. So it's not a framework. It's not meant to be a framework. I'm not trying to compete with TOGAF or anybody else. What it is, as I say, is a set of tools, and most of those are patterns or methods or that sort of thing. It's not software tools necessarily, although sometimes we recommend the odd software tool. They are, as I say, we're learning from real examples, and we want to continually learn from those examples. Plug and play. What we mean by that is that, of course, everybody's got frameworks and things that they're dealing with today. They're probably going to have to refresh them as they move into a more adaptive world. But we like to think that these tools are discrete, and you can kind of plug them in and use them with whatever else you're using, because they are quite contained in what they do. But they can actually be used as an entire toolkit. You might find you can use all of the tools. Well, great, I have, but you might not. We want to share experiences and design new tools as we go forwards. And we're always around to be hired for help if you need that. So we've got templates, examples. We're talking about not yet, but soon providing basic online training. And we'll also be looking at reviews and recommended software tools. We're working on a regular podcast. We haven't quite got that done yet, but we're working on it. And yeah, it's been fun to do, but it's been an awful lot of work over the last few months. But we also think that it's very much like an open source model. You can think of us as a kind of Red Hat, in the sense that we're offering everything as Creative Commons, open source, if you like, but we make our money by providing our services on the back of that. So I think I'm pretty good on time, am I?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Nigel, for introducing such a good tool and also the concept on adaptive change design. You will feel free to go to Nigel's website, adaptivechangedesign.com, to understand more. So let's move to the Q&A session. Aaron, may I pass to you?
Yeah, all right. Thank you so much, Nigel, for your insightful presentation. So, okay, is there any question from the audience?
Yeah, one of the question is about how do we apply those framework or those change design or so those methodology into not only the enterprise, but also for the startup or for the small medium business, SME. I think this is one of the key questions when we are talking about TOGAF in the past, right? How do we apply such a large framework? How do we apply such a large design methodology into just a very small company? So what is your view?
Well, TOGAF doesn't work with small companies. It doesn't work. I've tried it. No, I haven't tried it, to be honest. I dismissed it out of immediately, quite frankly. So I mentioned briefly that I worked for a startup a few years ago. And actually, a lot of these patterns and tools came from that startup. And that startup was me and a guy in Germany and another guy in Texas. And so that was pretty small. there was three of us. Then we had we had some technical designers in Germany. We had 6 people in Germany. And then we ended up with 30 people in Romania actually doing the code. So what we've got here is a situation where, well, a classic startup situation, tech startup. Nobody's really interested in talking about enterprise architecture, quite frankly. If you go to any tech startup in Silicon Valley, there isn't an enterprise architect. So the things that they talk about are all to do with technology. So it's that narrow version of enterprise architecture. In fact, that's quite common in America. When they talk about EA, they really just mean ITEA, as opposed to the bigger thing that TOGAF is meant to cover. So in that case, we used a lot of those design patterns. I showed you the enterprise integration patterns. Some of the techniques some of the other techniques, like actually I haven't spoken about it, but something we call business service specifications. And they're all, one of the things about the tools is they're all designed to be understood by anyone. So one of our criteria is to make sure that we don't ever create an artifact that can't be read by somebody else in the business, right? And because it's simple, but simple doesn't mean it's stupid. It's cleverly simple. It lends itself to very easy communication. And in my case, between me in London, a team in Germany, and another team in Romania. So they are, the great thing about the tools is they're small, they're simple, and they're meant to be obvious.
Okay, so what is your view, Aaron?
Yeah, I think, yes, I like the comment just now, Nigel mentioned that, if your architecture cannot be consumed by the business, then, it's not really the architecture. Because I think many of them are focusing too much on the technicality, whereby actually it's more on the delivering value. Okay, maybe I just want to ask about, just now you mentioned on the 2 important aspects on the transformation. The first one is the culture. The second one is the business. Of course, now I think most of us in this audience are pretty much with the IT background, with a technical background. So perhaps, Nigel, you could share with us how can we so-called overcome our, I wouldn't call it weakness, but the area that we need to strengthen, right? Understanding the enterprise culture and the business, etc. Perhaps you have insightful experience to share.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. One of the challenges we have, well, okay, there's a number of challenges. I mentioned earlier on about the IQ and EQ, and that we need to be more sociable. We need to be better at facilitation, and some of the sort of skills that you see in consulting companies, top class consultants, they're really good at talking to senior management. whoops, they're good at, sorry, I just knocked something over. They're good at talking to senior management. They're good at facilitating groups. They're very good at coming in quickly and using things like hypothesis-led techniques to come to a recommendation that goes to senior management with very good presentations, and that's how they win their business. You know what? How marvelous hypothesis-led work can be. I've been a consultant, so I've learned these things. You could get it about 75% right, and that's good enough. As long as you say it's a hypothesis, you're not lying. You're just, it's our guess. So those are some of the techniques. But the other thing that's a little bit more difficult to get over, and it's kind of where I tend to make my money, is explaining to the executive why they have to change the business culture, why top-down management isn't going to work anymore. You've got to do some top-down, but you've got to have bottom-up empowerment. So it's got to be a balance between those things. They've got to be ready to experiment. But going back to my systems models, you've got to know where to experiment. You're not going to experiment with your SCADA systems that run your grid, but you need to be able to experiment perhaps with your customer-facing systems. And that means you need to think about safe fail or safe to fail rather than fail safe. And that's quite alien to a lot of old traditional businesses. It's you know, we haven't worked that way before. So that's something we really need to get over, because that's actually the bigger culture problem, is the entire business culture rather than just the tech team.
Are you referring to the people, legacy people that you know, holding on the culture that, you know, they don't want to change, refuse to change?
It may not be that they've refused to change, but they're not seeing how to change, because they're just used to doing things in a top-down way, for example. And they're not used to empowering a team and letting them go and saying, well, that's okay, you can do something risky. You know, that seems wrong, yeah? But unfortunately, in an adaptive world, we have to design that sort of organization for it to be successful, because that's how it'll thrive. If it's too rigid in a traditional way, it's too brittle. And it won't flex.
Yeah, I guess this is connected to what you mentioned, that many enterprise architects, I think, will fail or already fail or will disappear the title. Instead, instead of the enterprise architecture is still very important, but need to be owned by the team. So owned by everybody instead of by the individual who run the show.
Yeah, and including the business. The business people on the team. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what one of the audience, Annie, mentioned that she appreciate your sharing, and also those business and frameworks, those help, but the human elements needs to be incorporated. Maybe just a comment from Annie, and so. Another questions from the audience is about is a fundamental question. Jeannie is a fresh graduate in the information system. What do you think is needed to be an enterprise architect?
What is neat? Oh gosh.
What are the qualities?
Now, you mean the next practice enterprise architect? Well, yeah, that's interesting. I do say that I would say that learning those sort of consulting skills somehow would be very useful. It certainly made a lot of difference to me. I actually worked for two consulting companies. for probably about 7 years in total. And although I was called an enterprise architect, I ended up being a business consultant. I mean, it's just what comes with the job, sort of thing. So, you know, listening skills. I've already talked about presentation or storytelling skills. Actually, storytelling is not the same as presentation. It's a much richer thing. I know it sounds silly, but it's not. It's important. So I think all of those, you know, being connected, being comfortable with having a conversation with the senior executive team, you know, or you see the CEO maybe in the lift or something, and you're not scared to say hi and talk about something to do with the business. Make sure you understand the business is probably the first thing.
Yeah, I agree. So we still have a few minutes. Aaron, do you have any questions?
I think just want to add about the Nigel comment on the understanding the business. I think, you know, what I've been seeing that is that as we are now, especially in the today digital era, we can't really talk about the technicality because, you know, I remember 20 years ago, right? I was very indwell with Java. So like, you know, I know everything, and I thought that, you know, I eat Java more than I eat rice, you know. So, but nowadays that the technical knowledge is commodity, right? People can just import or buy or outsource or etc. Like you can do it anything almost, but it's more the value on the how you can position the technology. So I think like what I just said is that how do we communicate? How do we do a storyboarding? How do we position it in such a way that our listener, right? So likelihood our key stakeholders can understand, can get their support, buy-in, etc. So like, you know, of course, most of us having a weakness in terms like we can't really talk with the human language. Of course, the joke is that we talk TCP/IP, we talk cloud, but we don't talk human language. We don't talk business. So I think there is something that
Exactly.
yeah, we need to look at.
Aaron, actually, there's a worse problem, you know, that enterprise architects have traditionally. It's not that we talk TCP/IP, we talk TOGAF. It's such an arcane language. Only people who've been on TOGAF courses understand TOGAF, and they don't understand it for very long, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Who in the business is going to understand it? The tech guys don't understand it either. So we're kind of stuck in this cloud of foreign language.
Yes.
Yeah. So and also nowadays with the cloud technologies, and also it is very easy for us to to develop our system. So I think the most important thing is to understand the business process and also align with the business drive. So we are not doing something that is technical sound, but business sound. That's, I think, the enterprise architects, the mandate behind the EA should be more important than the title of being an EA, I think. Okay, so anything to wrap up for our presentation today? Aaron, I think maybe I ask questions to wrap up today's presentation, maybe. So in the digital era, as you mentioned, we have a lot of different technologies, and also it's changing so fast. And in addition to the COVID and also the pandemic, I think the expectation from our business units will be even more harsh. They may expect in the past they may expect a system could be delivered in 1 year, but now I think they are asking for 1 month or 3 months. They are more demanding now. So with such a demanding, so how do we balance between the delivery as well as well designed? So because sometimes we need to do some dirty work in order to meet the delivery, right? So how do you strike the balance between them? Nigel, do you have any comment on that?
Yes. I'm afraid it's a whole new presentation. But the quick answer would be to say, come to Adaptive Change Design and read the tools. There's one particular tool that we developed called Transition State Planning. And you use it in combination with, there's a life cycle to Adaptive Change Design, like all these things. We have scan, focus, act, reflect. So it's a cycle. Now, that cycle, typically we will say is 3 to 4 months long. And in that 3 to 4 months time, you've got to what we call a transition state. And a transition state doesn't mean you necessarily deliver a working system, because it depends what you're building. But you always have a transition state at that same sort of period, 3 to 4 months. And the reason for that is that things change so much in 3 to 4 months. You need a point to replan. So you deliver what you can do, you can plan it for 3 to 4 months, and it'll probably be about right, and you'll get those things delivered, but you now need to replan for the next period of 3 to 4 months. I don't know if that answers your question entirely, because there's a bit more to it than that. And there's risk analysis and all sorts of other things you have to do. But with a bit of thinking, you can usually find a way to deploy something that gets you moving in the right direction, even if it doesn't deliver everything super quickly, because you can't, sometimes that's impossible.
Yeah, so I heard about we have the minimal viable product. So some people also suggest that we should have the minimal viable architecture.
Yes.
So in order to meet some baseline or meet some standard, in order not to violate too much. Okay. So that's the end of the time of the presentation. We still have a lot to discuss, but I think we do not have the time. So maybe we
please come to Adaptive Change Design. Subscribe. There's no cost, or you can become a member. But either way, we can carry on with this conversation. I'd be very happy to have the conversation with anyone.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, and thanks to Aaron, and also thanks to all the members from Hong Kong and also Singapore, and I understand some from the UK or other countries also. It's a great event. So stay healthy, everyone. So see you next time.